I'm Aaron Turner. I've got the opportunity to go through some insights that we want to share with you to help spark the conversations that we're going to have at the roundtables and at the vendor discussions today. My goal is to help plant some seeds with you, hopefully be a little controversial. The things I'm going to say may provoke some of you a little bit. I don't do it to offend, but I definitely want to get your opinions flowing throughout the rest of the day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our opportunity to sit at the big table, so to speak. I'm from a very large family, lots of cousins, lots of aunts and uncles. And whenever I would go to Thanksgiving, I'd have the opportunity to go first. When I was a kid, I'd sit at the little kids' table. Okay, it's usually this corner of the kitchen on linoleum, so that when the gravy and the potatoes get flung off the table, it doesn't make that big of a mess. I see some chuckles going around. It seems that this is a fairly widespread occurrence. Well, once you're able to move from the little kids' table to the big kids' table, there's this transition that takes place, at least in my family. I got the crap beaten out of me. I remember the first time that my older cousins thought that I was encroaching on their domain. And out in the backyard behind my grandmother's house, you know, there was a moment in time where I had to toughen up. Well, I think that we as an industry, we as professionals are nearing that time. A lot of us have been in situations where maybe we haven't necessarily had the voice that we've needed to do things strategically. And because of the latest disclosures of vulnerabilities and attacks, data losses and such, the time is coming for us to, so to speak, move to the big kids' table. But the question is, are we ready to do that? So let me give you a little bit of background. I've been in the IT industry since the early 90s. I used to do all sorts of kind of work with this great company called Novell. I was a Novell partner back in the early 90s, and then later in my career moved on to Microsoft and did things there. And when I was working with those companies like Novell and WordPerfect and Microsoft, we would always go and tell potential customers that information technology is going to be this awesome competitive advantage for you. You're going to be able to do so much more because your IT systems are going to give you a competitive advantage over the rest of the market. Well, right now I don't know if we can say that. We truly have seen the commoditization of information technology to the point where if any of you have ever taken a road trip on Interstate 90 in eastern Washington, there's a whole bunch of hydroelectric plants out there as you go down Interstate 90. You'll see this one particular county is called Franklin County. And in Franklin County, there are 3 of the largest hydroelectric projects in the United States. As a result, electricity is really, really cheap. And because the Columbia River is what feeds that electricity, it's really, really reliable. And so as you're driving down that freeway, you will see these huge, they look to be almost like the size of Walmarts, but they're usually 4 or 5 stories tall. And what they are is they're massive Amazon data centers or eBay data centers or Microsoft data centers. They essentially are running off of the kinetic energy of the Columbia River to power the electricity that feeds those data centers. And more companies are stuffing their IT into those big boxes because it's just so cheap to run. And so we have seen the commoditization of IT to the point now where it's just pipes. It's just plumbing. And so if you think about it, it's not necessarily the technology that's important. So if I somehow got in a time machine and took my 1995 self and came to 2013 today, I don't think I'd be doing very many sales from a technology perspective. I don't think very many companies are saying, yeah, it's the technology itself that's going to help drive the efficiencies of our company. Instead, it's really about the intellectual property that is flowing through there. And that's really shown by what's happened with APT1, with the disclosure that Mandiant did this spring, with the advent of basically massively coordinated nation-state attacks, not on the technology itself, but they want to suck all of the intellectual property out of those organizations. They don't attack the technology to take control of the technology itself. They attack the technology to suck the intellectual property out of it. And so really the competitive advantage becomes the intellectual property. And so that's the vision that we're going to have to take a look at, is when the CEO of an organization comes to us and says, what are you doing to protect our intellectual property? it's really going to be about how do we competitively protect that intellectual property against coordinated attacks. It's not going to be, do you have the right firewalls installed? Do you have the right antivirus? Do you have the right insert security tool X? It's going to be, do you have a strategy to protect that intellectual property all up? So when the New York Times ran their headline that basically they'd been under attack for quite some time, it resulted in a significant amount of awareness at the C-suite level within public and private companies. Basically, we're sitting in a situation now where we have, it is now totally out in the open, and I will say, over the last 5 years here at the IANS conferences, we have talked about sophisticated adversaries. So for those of us in this room, these headlines are not new. This is something that we've been sharing for years. But now it's gotten to the point where senior executives can no longer ignore it. And so as the result, we're going to be asked to do things that maybe we haven't done before. So when you think about it, there's a situation where, you know, the chief executive of the country, the president, when he takes the time to say something like this, we'd better pay attention.
America must also face the rapidly growing threat from cyber attacks. Now, we know hackers steal people's identities and infiltrate private emails. We know foreign countries and companies swipe our corporate secrets. Now our enemies are also seeking the ability to sabotage our power grid, our financial institutions, our air traffic control systems. We cannot look back years from now and wonder why we did nothing in the face of real threats to our security and our economy. And that's why earlier today, I signed a new executive order that will strengthen our cyber defenses by increasing information sharing and developing standards to protect our national security, our jobs, and our privacy.
I had mixed feelings when he delivered that message. I was grateful that we got the press time. Okay? As information security professionals, it is important for us to have that level of exposure to help bring our issues to light. Now, we can all take issue with the different political ramifications of the approach that he's chosen to take with the executive order. But I will say this. In the spring of 2007, I was working for the Department of Energy at the Idaho National Laboratory, and I was invited to go up and visit this company called Telvent up in Alberta, Canada. And when I got on site in Calgary there, I started to work through it, and Telvent is a company that makes control systems for pipelines. Now, as I got to know the culture of the organization, and I was up there on a goodwill mission from the Department of Energy because Telvent makes a lot of the control systems that go into the pipelines that run not just in the United States but around the world. Now, a little bit of asterisks here. Telvent was also the company that the CIA compromised when the Russians, the Soviet Union, ordered the control system that built out their Trans-Siberian natural gas pipeline and blew it up in 1984. And so Telvent has a history of, I guess, product integrity problems, sometimes caused by us. Well, when I was on site up there in 2007, I was looking through their infrastructure, having collaborations with their executives, speaking with their technical folks, and almost immediately I noticed that they had a couple of systems that were completely out of their control. Like there was someone on the outside operating these other systems. And I mentioned to them, and I said, you know, do you have any controls in place to make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen? And their response was, oh, we're just a company that makes switches for pipelines. Who cares? Right? Now, the culture within that organization was driven by the fact that they were a multinational company. They were actually owned by a conglomerate in Spain. It was a bunch of guys from all around the world that were working up there in Calgary. And they really didn't have the mindset that, wow, we make stuff that other people want to blow up. And I left that day in 2007 with a big long list of things that said, it is my opinion that you should do X, Y, and Z. Well, you'll notice the name Telvent now because they're in the APT1 report. They were part of the massive amount of intellectual property that's been stolen. So you've got to think through situations like this. How do we go about affecting a cultural change to make sure that people are motivated to meet what the President of the United States just talked about, at the same time making sure that we still do business? So when you're in a situation when the head of GE is talking about how much money he is spending to protect GE's intellectual property, when you're looking at the head of Amazon, who Jeff Bezos is probably one of the smartest guys I've ever had the chance to shake hands with and talk to for a few minutes. His organization, Amazon, has had some of the worst breaches over the last 12 months of anybody, with the Zappos problem and other things that have happened in his world. He is not a guy who likes to have a black eye in the market. And so he's someone who's also dedicating significant amount of resources to this. And that's true. If you take a look at the security hires that he's made over the last little bit, significant amounts of money are being spent at Amazon. Whitman has gone about doing probably one of the largest security acquisitions in the market. It started under her predecessor, but she finished up acquisitions of ArcSight and Fortify and all those other products that have been rolled up into one. Of anyone in the market who's spent money on security, HP has. Goldman Sachs. So you've got a banker who's talking about, in one moment of his testimony before Congress, he talked about how cyber attacks could undermine the very fabric of the U.S. banking system. And as a result, his organization is making investments in this. So let's talk about those investments. So independent analysts have taken a look at the market and says that we're going to move from $55 billion spent to $86 billion spent over the course of 5 years. And that means a total increase in the number of information security professionals from 2.3 million to 4.2 million people. So with that kind of influx, I mean, you're doubling in size there. There's going to have to be a change in the way that we onboard those folks. I look around the room today and I see a lot of folks that I've seen at IANS here in Washington, D.C. for years. We're kind of this tight-knit group. We share war stories together. We've taken the licks together. We're not exactly the most open group, right? We're kind of like this closed group of people because we've been beaten on by the outside world a lot of times. The expectations are very high for us, but yet sometimes we're under-resourced and we're not exactly set up for success. And so what this chart tells us is that we've got to figure out how to double our workforce as information security professionals while keeping our standards high. We're going to have to think about spending wisely a significantly greater amount of money. So there was one IANS client who said that it's their objective that in 1 year that they plan to spend $300 million on cybersecurity. That was just their investment in cybersecurity. So if you think about that kind of growth, that kind of focus, we've got to have something that holds us together. So here we are, the young cousin about to get whooped by his older cousins, sitting at the big table. I was fortunate, maybe unfortunate, depending upon your perspective, to be at Microsoft during the heart of the Microsoft problems. So I worked there from 1998 to 2006. I was a security person at Microsoft before there was even a security team. It was like a hobby. And so when there was a security problem, I would get called in, and I had to do my day job and the security job. Well, finally, when we got the executive support to do security, I remember my first time to go give a briefing to a guy named Bill Vecti. You may recognize that name. He's now the vice president of software at HP. Bill Vecti was the guy who was responsible for finishing up Windows 95, and basically he was a big-time guy inside of Microsoft. So I go in to do this security review with Bill Vecti, and I wasn't yet 30 years old, and I had done my best. I thought that I had prepared well for this presentation and gotten my data together. And I go into this presentation, and I just got creamed. I was so totally unprepared to answer the business questions that he wanted to focus on. I was prepared to talk about, here are the number of customers that were impacted, here's how many software lines of code were at fault, here's all the patches that we had to ship. And so I had all of this, what I thought to be relevant data. But I'll never forget the question that he asked me was, how many customers am I going to lose as a result of this security problem? So I hadn't done that analysis. I had done the historical analysis to say, here's the impact, but I was not prepared. As a result, I was summarily ushered out of the room and told, come back when you're ready to talk with the big boys. Same thing, and you'd think that I'd learned my lesson. 6 months later, I got invited to do a review with Steve Ballmer on the issue. And it was my responsibility to ask for some resources to help fix the security problem at Microsoft. And I go in to do this review with Steve Ballmer, and I thought that I'd taken Bill Vecte's advice, and I had some prognostications and some forecasts, and he creamed me again. Right? Basically, and it was a moment for me to learn that those of us in information security at times have not been party to some of the critical business strategy discussions that were going on. And so the reason why I got creamed in the Ballmer review was because I had not collaborated properly with the other outside of the security team members to prepare for that presentation. While I had my security prognostication, they were completely out of line with the other product forecasts. And so as a result, I came off looking as an isolated sort of island in the middle of the ocean. So let my creaming, if you will, my poor experiences serve as sort of a guideline to all of you that when you get invited to sit at the big table, when you're invited to sit with the board of directors of your publicly traded company, that you are going to be providing more information. So let's talk a little bit about some of the problems that we have as an immature market or an immature industry. We have this thing called GRC, and it's an acronym that everyone seems to understand. And as I walked through the show floor at RSA, I saw lots of GRC all over the place. GRC this, GRC that. When I went and talked to the vendors who were promoting GRC, it was interesting to me, their response to me when I asked them, what do you think your product does really well? And they said, well, we're really good at tracking PDFs. Okay, how's GRC related to tracking PDFs? And I said, well, when you upload your policy about XYZ into our system, we will track the moment that policy is uploaded. Oh, okay, well, thanks. I appreciate that, right? So sometimes these acronyms or these tools that we're purportedly supposed to use aren't exactly ready to really help us do the job. Another thing is that we have these InfoSec myths. Because of the insular nature of our organizations, of our industry, at times we have these organizational myths that lead into our InfoSec myths. And the reason why that happens is because we don't have real data. We don't have adversarial-driven data. I had dinner last night with the head of sales for a large boutique information security consultancy. And as we were talking over dinner there, I said, so what's keeping your lights on? He's like, well, you know what? We've had more penetration test RFPs come through our door in the last 6 months than we've ever seen. And I looked at him and I said, you and I both know that those things are worthless. A penetration test is worth, about as much money as the paper it's printed on. But companies are still paying, the $80,000 a pop to do just a standard penetration test. Now, penetration tests should be part of an overall framework. But in this case, the majority of the RFPs that they're seeing coming through, the penetration test is their security program. Like that is what it is. So we've got myths. We've got industry fads. And we have reputations as being Dr. No, right? Oftentimes, information security guys are the ones who are putting the kibosh on everything. So we look through this. How can we govern that which we don't know that exists? How do we manage risks that we may not totally understand? How do we devote the majority of time into situations where we may not be providing the best value? So I want someone to kind of think through here. Look at this picture, and I want you to guess how many bales of marijuana are stashed inside of one of these cars. I heard someone say all of them. Maybe. This is the U.S. border. This is the U.S.-Mexican border. Okay, this is a border checkpoint. All right. I think this is a really good photographic analogy of what firewalls are doing today. Okay. So if we think about the effectiveness of our drug control and our immigration policy, we're relying on these border checkpoints. Now, I think we all can agree that our drug control and immigration policy is broken, okay? That it just is not really working that well. So, but yet this is the control that's in place. That's where we're at in information security, is basically we continue to believe that these perimeter defenses are doing us some good, when in fact they're not really providing the value that we need. So here we have this awesome picture of weight loss fads, okay? Dexatrim and I don't know, whatever else is on there. You know, and then you see the scroll underneath, big data, security intelligence, right? This is the way I felt on the RSA show floor for probably the last 3 or 4 years. When I go on there, I feel like I'm in some sort of infomercial, you know, where Ron Popeil is ready to bring out this rotisserie that has some sort of information security thingy rolling through it, right? And that's kind of where we've become. Unfortunately, our industry has become driven by these almost fad-based advertisements. DLP is a really good example, okay? DLP was all sorts of things to all sorts of people. So sometimes, you know, here we are, people think we look like this, but this is kind of what that's going to become. Peter Cooper sent me an email over the weekend as we were working on this deck, and he pointed out something. If you take a look at state CISOs and CIOs, so these are the heads of the information security and information groups at the 50 United States, okay? There's been almost 75% turnover in 18 months at those places, okay? So it's just been a treadmill of people not succeeding. And I think that's indicative of this change that we're going through. So we think about managing risk. When I think about the most successful CIOs, CISOs, whatever you want to put the acronym at, of people who are truly responsible for managing information technology risk, I very rarely see those people sitting behind their desk. In one situation, we were retained with one of our clients to go take a look at an APT investigation. And so we were flying around the world. We actually stopped at 7 of their different offices around the world, and we stopped and took a look at what was going on. And that CISO came with us for the whole trip and sat through all the meetings and all the investigative briefings. And he was one of the most proactive people at managing the problem I've ever seen. He was not letting his people do it. He wanted to understand it first, and he served as a good example to his staff. Now, he couldn't solve it himself. He had to delegate eventually. But he wanted to understand that problem personally so that he could actually get it done. So instead of measuring how many controls we have, I think we should start measuring how long the bad guys have been inside of our building. When we were going through the preparation for this, and I saw this slide, the company that I thought of the most was Nortel. You know, that Canadian company that had bad guys inside of their building for 15 years. You wonder why they're bankrupt? Did you take a look at how much their intellectual property sold for in their auction? It was awful. And the reason why was because the value of that intellectual property had been driven to zero because the bad guys had stolen it, all the good stuff. So you think about these kinds of problems. And basically, we've got to start thinking in new ways. We've got to start thinking about all of these crazy things that are being introduced. You know, we've got all of these new devices that are being presented, and then we have the marketing spiel coming from the MDM vendor saying, we're going to solve all of your problems. Let me just tell you that that's not the case. And so basically you're in a situation now where we've got to become the progressive folks. We've got to become the ones who say, look, I understand that you want to use this crazy new technology. I don't agree with it, but you believe that it's important to move the business forward? Great. You think that every employee should have an iPhone or an Android tablet that they can bring to work and do all their critical information work on? Okay, that's your business decision. But here's what I recommend you do for compensating controls. And it's that kind of discussion that you have to have. You've got to study the threats and then implement a team of people who have a wide range of expertise and abilities. Now, back in the good old days, the CIO was the person who was putting everything into the computing system. Well, now we're going to start moving towards these what I'll call a data executive. It's someone who's thinking about protecting the intellectual property of the organization. So that's why we're here. We're here to think through this, okay? The provocative aspect of this, I hope that you take away from, is that we have been insular. We haven't necessarily paid attention to our peers from a business perspective sometimes. And now it's time for us to really put all of these things together and say, how can we build eclectic teams with a wide range of skills and expertise so that we can actually go about and fight the adversary? Okay, it's not about how many tools you deploy. It's not how many firewalls are out there. It is how you are going to take hand-to-hand combat to the people who are living in your network. There are large teams that are being paid millions of dollars by our adversaries to live on your networks. What are you going to do to get them off? And that's going to be, I think, the next 5 years is going to be that type of cultural change of moving from, wow, we've implemented the right controls to, let's roll up our sleeves and let's go kick some butt. Let's go make sure that these people are not fat, dumb, and happy when they're sitting on our networks. I don't want to be the CISO of the next Nortel, right? Where the bad guys have been on there for decades. So that's why we're here at IANS, is to talk about these kinds of things. Over the next 2 days, today and tomorrow, we're going to have 5 tracks that you can attend. And due to time, we don't have time to go through them like we usually do. But please take a look through your guides, and you'll see descriptions for those there.